All right, so Jordan, take it away.
Awesome. My name's Jordan Rice. I work at Nike. What I do during the day is super fun and mostly boring. But what I really get excited about is some of the work that I do on the climate side of things. So I've gotten involved to help Topher with this, and I'm really excited today to introduce all of you to Kavita Patel, who we're going to have a little conversation here today. We're going to open it up at the end to a Q&A with all of you. But Kavita is the Vice President of Marketing at Neutral Foods, which is the first carbon neutral food company in the United States.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Previous to that, she was Vice President of Marketing and Sales for Salt and Straw, which I'm a big fan of. My kids are an even bigger fan of. And she spent 14 years prior to that with Whole Foods Market in brand, marketing, technology, purchasing, and partnerships. So she basically ran the place. In 2017, she was selected as a fellow in the Food Policy Leadership Institute at George Washington University, led by former Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, Kathleen Merrigan. You are a culinary school graduate, which is incredible,
Yeah.
a native Texan, and she enjoys spending her free time traveling for food, same,
Yep.
watching documentaries, and learning new things. So please help me welcome Kavita.
Thank you.
Just briefly about Neutral, some cool things. They're taking a two-pronged approach, if I understand this.
Mm-hmm.
One, working at the farm level to reduce emissions with farmers at the farm level through
That's right.
crops and how you feed cattle and all that to create dairy.
Yep.
And also through carbon credit offsets,
Mm-hmm.
which I know can sometimes be a little controversial, but they're working through Climate Action Reserve on those offsets to make them real, additional, permanent, verifiable, and
Yep.
enforceable, which is pretty rad. They also just had a big raise in the last year.
Yep.
And participating in that were dignitaries like LeBron James and Questlove, big fan on my part, but also Bill Gates, Mark Cuban, John Legend, and you are already in north of 2,000 grocery stores, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
So
yeah.
and you have desires to move beyond dairy into other food product as well that's grown on
right.
farms.
Yep.
So, a little about Neutral. You guys can all ask more. Is there anything you want to add about Neutral before we get going?
No, but I'm very impressed at your homework. Yeah, I mean, I was expecting to maybe have to correct one or two things there, but no, that was very good.
She'll correct me later to make me look good on this. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you investing some time in this.
Yeah.
Agriculture is often forgotten in this conversation, but it is the third worst from an emissions perspective. It is ahead of things that we think about, like transportation and buildings, and it's behind manufacturing and electricity generation. So it's right in the middle of the climate issues that we're tackling today.
For sure.
But would love to hear about how you landed at Neutral, what drew you there, what was it about Neutral and the mission?
Yeah.
Can you give us the origin story?
Sure. Yeah. It was, let's go back. Let's see. I've been there 2.5 years now. So I joined in March of 2020. It was a very interesting time to be joining a company.
Great timing.
Right? I know. Right. And to be perfectly honest, and Matt, who's our founder, knows that, obviously he was part of this conversation, but I had another job offer. Like, I had made a difficult decision to sort of exit Salt and Straw. It was time for me. I came and got done what I wanted to get done, and I was sort of taking a minute to kind of look at what was next, and had something totally lined up. And this recruiter convinced me to go meet Matt, the founder of Neutral, and I thought, all right, I'll give him 15 minutes, but I've already got a job lined up, right? So I'll go give him 15 minutes, and then 3 hours later, we were still talking, and I was like, okay, so clearly, I think you've struck on something that I need to go do my own homework on and see if there's a there. And that was all about sort of the carbon sort of footprint of the agricultural, sort of sector. And me, as someone that had worked in the food industry for so long, I had been around long enough to see the transition from natural to organic to local, this idea of knowing your farmer, knowing your food, and then thinking about your food miles. And so I've seen sort of these different sort of evolutions in the food world, and I guess I had not really thought about, though, who was making a big enough sort of drawing attention to the fact that there's a lot of carbon emissions tied up in the way that we produce and consume and distribute our food. And so I got really drawn into what the vision is that was shared with me. So I joined in March of 2020 as employee number 2, I guess, right? Nice. There was the founder and then just me, and it was, trying to start the company and build it and, get traction and get consumers interested, get retailers interested. So that's a bit of the origin story. Yeah.
That's super cool. Yeah. And you kind of hit on something there that I didn't mention in the intro about neutral. It's the full life cycle. It's the food miles. It's not just the cows and the milk.
Oh, totally.
It's
right.
creating. It's getting it to market. It's end to end.
Yes, very much from, if you think about, look, so do we have it perfect? No. If I share the life cycle with you guys, I'm sure some of you guys will figure out, well, what about this? And did you think about that? And so I totally get that. I'm sure we don't have it perfect. But I will say that I think we're doing a heck of a lot better than most out there. And I think at least directionally to be trying to do better than we are is part of what I'm trying to advocate for, in addition to just trying to help influence the whole industry to go in this direction, right? And I know it won't come overnight. But yes, we are very mindful of realizing that, it's not just about when product hits our dock door and then we do something with it and then after we ship it out, we forget about it, right? It's really taking into consideration, okay, so what did the cows that were out on pasture, do they eat grass that had to have any fertilizer added? And if so, what was the carbon footprint of that? And if water had to be irrigated and, brought in, what was the footprint of that? It adds it all the way up. And yes, we have to make some assumptions along the way, right? But we try to be very, very sort of inclusive of what that full life cycle is so that we probably, over error on sort of the side of being maybe a little too inclusive. Some people will look at our footprints that the calculations that we put out there and they're like, yeah, that's crazy high. And it's well, we're kind of erring on the side of making sure that we're not shortcutting anything, so it kind of works both ways. But
I like that.
Yeah.
That's great. So you've been at this now for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
What have you seen as major hurdles or what's getting in the way of convincing people to make choices in what they're consuming, like food products, from a more kind of earth-friendly, earth-conscious way?
I would say one of the biggest things that I've encountered is, look, when you think about the way that most of us make decisions about food, it's usually 2 things that are the top 2 features usually. Taste. And is there a health outcome I'm trying to achieve? It's usually for one of those 2 reasons. Amazing if you get both out of it, right? Yeah. So when we're trying to talk to people about thinking about the carbon footprint of their food, you're trying to talk to someone about something that they're not used to, thinking of their food purchases through that lens primarily. They still want to know, well, but does it taste good? Because if it doesn't taste good, who cares if it's carbon neutral or if you lower the emissions? It's still got to taste really good. And especially when we're thinking about our flagship product is milk, and milk is hugely consumed by kids. If you are used to buying whatever carton of milk because your kids love it, do you take the chance that I'm going to switch to something else? And so then they're but so if you've taken the, if it's does it taste different? I'm it does not taste any different. There's not, it tastes like delicious organic milk. But, we have sometimes those little things. So we don't, we're not used to talking to, consumers are not used to kind of being talked to about the carbon footprint or the carbon neutral aspect of their food. It's tell me how delicious it is. Make me get an appetite. So that is one of the biggest things, is just sort of we're trying to approach, and that is our biggest differentiator. And so I don't want to, yes, of course we want to talk about how delicious and nutritious the food is, but we're trying to compete with a different message in a space where people are just not used to that. So that's one of the biggest learnings. And I just think that also we did some consumer research recently here in Portland, right? And, I got some pushback within the company, which we're still a small team. When I joined, I was employee number 2. Now we're up to about 15 people. But, I got some pushback because they were like, well, are you sure you want to do the research in Portland? Because we're all over the country. Because they're like, are you sure you're not in a little bit of a bubble? And I was like, well, yes, I get it. But I'm also like, we got to win in Portland because then we're going to win everywhere else was my attitude. But one of the things that, just in talking to people is, look, caring about the climate is one of many things I need to care about. Whether it's voting rights or, all sorts of different issues, right? Equality, there's so many things for me to care about. And so, yes, while I care about climate, it's one of many things I could be spending my time on. And so there's still that, I think challenge of just getting people to realize that like simple purchases, like an everyday purchase of your food can go a long way. And we're trying to make it easy for you. We've done the hard work, so you should feel confident in your decision. But again, it's still we're just not used to making decisions solely from that aspect and from that lens. And so I think that's another thing is just, trying to reassure folks that say, oh, but it's not catching on fast enough. It's like, guys, we are still in early days. It's in the world of thinking about this with food. So like, you gotta hang on. Yeah. You gotta have a stomach for like playing the long game on this kind of stuff, right? Yeah. This kind of change doesn't happen overnight, but every day we just gotta go out there and have those conversations, one person at a time, and eventually, 15 years will go by and hopefully there will be an impact, right? But yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. Yeah.
Do you see? I've heard many folks talk about how they communicate their product and their brand in this space. Mention that there's a bit of a slippery slope. Like you can talk about your climate impact, and in one side of that conversation, it feels like you're preaching or correcting or judging, right? Like, oh, you're buying regular milk. Do you know the climate impact of that? And on the other end, it's like, well, you can make this choice, and it might cost a little bit more. But like, how are you approaching that conversation? As you try to kind of break through those hurdles, And I would imagine that, that's a little bit different in Portland than maybe it is in Omaha or Chicago.
Yeah, right? No, absolutely. Look, I
Not to pick on the Midwest. I'm from the Midwest.
No, yeah. No, I grew up in Texas. I grew up in Fort Worth, so I totally get it. Like, I even talk about internally, like, I love my parents to death, but they are not sort of the audience I'm trying to reach right now. My parents will shop based on what the price is. Doesn't matter what the fossil fuels it took to create that. I'm shopping based off of like, don't make me pay $6 for a gallon of milk. That sounds crazy, right? So eventually, yes, I will try and work on convincing my parents, but for now, again, I want to try and find the people that are willing to are willing to buy into these products once they just need to know they exist. Yeah. Right? Someone that just needs to know, I didn't know that carbon neutral milk existed. Talk to me about how you guys do it. Okay, yeah, got it, great. Like, I'm sort of that same way. I want to make better decisions. I don't have the time to do all the homework. Yeah. So if I can go to a trusted resource that makes me feel good, then I'm willing to sort of change my behavior. But again, it's just keeping up with and finding out about these things and not having to spend 3 hours doing your homework and your research, but wanting to feel like you can trust this stuff. It's not easy. It's not easy.
It's interesting you mentioned the word trust, because one of the things we talked about earlier and that I wanted to ask you about is, I work at a footwear apparel and brand marketing company, but brand building in the space is so important to build trust. And it's a new space, and you don't want to make people feel shamed for making different decisions, but you want to bring people into a brand that is trying to do the right thing. And I would love to hear about how you approach that with a company like Neutral, and how you're trying to establish and grow that brand, and what you want it to stand for, and how you want to build that trust. So people don't have to do their homework. They don't have to go look it up, that they can trust a certain brand, like, the Patagonia brand kind of effect, right? Like,
I mean, they have incredible equity. I mean, they've built that over time.
Decades. Yeah. Over
decades of always trying to do the right thing, or at least coming at it from trying to do the right thing. Right. And that, that is one of the conversations we have internally a lot, is that you can't fake brand trust. Right. Like, it's only going to show up over time of doing the right thing by whatever stakeholder, it's the customer, if it's the farmer, as if it's the animal. Just making those decisions day in and day out is the only way to build that kind of trust. There's no way to shortcut it. There's no way to, I don't know. And consumers will ultimately be the ones to decide whether or not we've built that trust, right? Like we just have to make those decisions, the right, the good decisions, the right decisions day in, day out, and hopefully we will be rewarded for that. But, it's definitely not easy because I think, and especially in this space, this is what I also talk about internally with everyone is like, there's just going to be more scrutiny. So like, as one of the first companies, as the first carbon neutral food company, we get to set the standards and set them high. And I think that's part of like coming from Whole Foods, at least that's what I got used to, was like we never budged on the quality standards over time.
That's a good example.
And yes, maybe there were some manufacturers or some consumers that were like, why won't you but we did our homework and we had a point of view and that was that. And I sort of feel like that's our responsibility as the ones that are going in and building sort of the first, more climate responsible food brands, set the standards, set the bar high for what consumers should expect, the kinds of, if you do need to buy offsets, the quality, the level, the way you measure your footprint, how you actually report on the, emissions reductions. I think that's our responsibility to set a high standard, so that hopefully everyone, but also make it desirable so that other people want to kind of come in this direction too.
Yeah. As you think about establishing that brand and communicating that brand, positioning out to consumers who will make a decision in the dairy aisle of your product versus another, do you think about how you communicate things like carbon credits? Are we there yet? Is that nuance able to be communicated as you think about establishing your brand and your communication and marketing strategy? Or I mean, I know this crowd might have opinions on carbon offsets.
Exactly.
But
right?
My parents don't.
Yeah.
And they would consider themselves climate conscious.
See?
Like, how do you weave that in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to. So it's a few different. I mean, we have these like, I don't know. It's right. It's so much psychology and kind of thinking of like, I try to put my own hat on as a consumer and how I make decisions, but I try not to let that also like we balance that with other people that live in Texas that tell us how they make these decisions. So, I mean, I think this is where like this might be something that we'll go into more detail on the website, but are we going to go into as much detail on like our Instagram? Probably not. We try to serve up the right amount of content to not lose people that at some point they're like, dude, it's just milk. Like, I get it. You guys have made it better. Cool. Like, I don't need you to spend 10 minutes talking my ear off about it. Actually, you got the coupon? Okay, great. Like, let me just try it and buy it. And if we're, like, but then you do have the people that want to like talk about like, well, okay, but where are you getting these credits? Okay, and exactly, and who's verifying them and what's the vintage on them, and like they want to go, and so wanting to be able to also do, have those conversations, knowing that the vast majority, though, at the end of the day, don't. And I get that. Like, I look at my to-do list, and if, I don't have time to think in granular detail about every decision I got to make during the day. Sometimes I just need to be told what is the good one. Yeah. And feel good about that in the moment. And move on, right?
Dude, it's just better milk.
It's just milk.
Just better milk.
It's just better, right? And sometimes that's good.
Decision fatigue throughout the day. I mean, that's the thing. That's the hard part about what you are all trying to do is that someone's in the dairy aisle and they've made a million decisions that day, and they don't want to like read the label and like. Yeah,
please don't.
At that point of the day, you're like, I got to get dinner on the table for the kids, and I just need to know what the right choice is, and so that is. The it's where you're playing, it's your strength, but it's also the challenge in communicating that.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. It's totally. So it's interesting to think about the times. Okay, when am I potentially open to having even a 2-minute internal dialogue about my milk choices? Yeah. It definitely may not be at the shelf in the supermarket. That's where you just want to like look and pick and feel good and walk away. Yeah. But when is it? Is it a certain podcast you're listening to? Is there something going on in the news that's weather related that's making us, so it's trying to find those moments where, okay, maybe someone might be reachable so that the next time they go to the grocery store, they see the yellow carton and they're like, that's right.
The one I want.
That's the one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one last question.
Okay.
Before I turn it over to this unruly mob we have in front of us. And this one came up just kind of, this is off the cuff as we've been talking here. It occurs to me that marketing of neutral is not just the decisions in the dairy aisle, but as you're working with farmers to convince them to work with you on some of these pilots around reducing emissions. And some of the data I looked at from y'all was anywhere between 19 to 50% or more reduction in emissions from just the farm footprint itself.
Yeah.
Can you say anything about how you approach those conversations and position yourself as you're engaging with, and you're engaging with some pretty big names, like Carmen Ranch and things like that. But I would imagine there's
Totally, right? So I'm glad you brought that up. That's been an interesting, so I took the job at Neutral purely like, I always think about like coming from the world of marketing. Yeah. I always think of the consumer who's my main person that I think about that I'm marketing to. What's been really a really interesting sort of journey for me at Neutral has been reminding myself that like, we've got all these farmers and ranchers that we're trying to work with to put these carbon reduction projects on their farms and ranches. Like, no, that's definitely a very much a stakeholder that we've got to try and bring in. The retailers, the wholesalers, our investors, like it's been a really good reminder of like sort of that multi-stakeholder model, which I came from Whole Foods and totally get. But so in working with, farmers and ranchers, a few different things, right? Like, so just even from my time at Whole Foods and having been in the food industry for so long, they are both heroes, but they also get a lot of the blame. Like, truthfully, they feel like I'm not just like, I don't think I'm putting words in their mouth. Like, I've heard certain farmers and ranchers say that like, we feel like we're the ones being vilified in the news as like the ones responsible for this problem, right? So I get that like, there's a sensitivity there. Right, with both, even if they reluctantly, sort of agree that, yes, I get it, that animal-based agriculture has a higher kind of carbon footprint, and so by working in that industry, I'm contributing to that. But I've just been doing what generations, I totally get that, like,
we need to feed people too.
Yes, we need to feed people. We've been doing this for decades, so but like, quit making us seem like we're the villains. So I get that sensitivity. But at the end of the day, Neutral, like, we really care about reducing that carbon footprint. But one of the things that we've really kind of figured out is, and this is not new thinking, I don't mean to like for us to take credit for this, but just recognizing that like, yes, while Neutral really just like, if the number one thing I care about is like that bringing down the carbon intensity of your farm, right, with whatever we feed the animals, how we manage the manure, if we convert you guys to solar panels, whatever it is to reduce the carbon intensity, at the end of the day, there are all these other co-benefits that come from it, right? Like, it's sort of like if you have your own house and you invest in your kitchen or your bathroom, I mean, you're investing in making then your house worth that much more, just the value of it. So like, electrifying your, like choosing to, install solar panels will have a return on that investment. Choosing to install a better manure management system will have a return. So like, you can talk to them and get them to want to do these projects, even if we don't talk about the carbon benefit, because that may be the thing that's like kind of a sore subject. But if it's like, well, I've been wanting to upgrade this thing, and it's no longer kind of working at maximum capacity, efficiency. So sure, okay, you're willing to invest in that. Plus it means that like, I can now make compost as a byproduct and liquid fertilizer that I don't have to buy. So that's reducing my input. Like, there's all these other co-benefits that we're able to kind of find common ground on. So again, that's been also a bit of a learning of like, we can get what we both want, which is like a lower carbon footprint, plus farmers and ranchers get projects done that they otherwise wouldn't have capital to do or experts to help guide them on. so they get things that they want to get done. It improves the value of their farm. It makes it more resilient for the future. And we don't have to necessarily get into that, what's become just like yet another place for people to get kind of losing the bigger picture and getting caught up in sort of the political back and forth, right? Yeah. Which is an easy place for people to just get and then lose, and then we're talking past each other instead of actually getting work done. So, but yeah, I mean, working with farmers and ranchers, that has probably been the biggest thing, which is like, we don't have to lead with sort of the carbon piece, even though that's what we get super excited about, right? That we just have to learn that, like, that's not the thing that gets everyone else excited. So like, but we can still get there. It's
There's co-benefits across the spectrum.
There's co-benefits. So like, let's talk about those things, right?
I like that. Do you take an active role in having to have that conversation? Is that part of marketing neutral?
Yeah, definitely, right? Like as we build out what we talk about, what are our talking points with farmers and how do we use, how do we speak with them to be kind of like references for one another so that when we want to do this project, we can say, well, call up farmer so-and-so in, this county and they can tell you, so yeah, I definitely get very involved, whether it's our farmers and ranchers, the consumers, the retailers, the investors. It's,
awesome.
That's good.
That's great. Yeah. Super cool. Well, I have blabbed enough, and I know you all want to hear more from her on other topics.
Probably not. But
I would love to have a couple questions from y'all. Go ahead. Just do me a favor, project as much as possible.
Sure.
So we can. That's cool.
That's
You're
great.
good at this.
Yes.
We have our next interviewer. I like it.
You've listed off a lot of variables that come into making a carbon neutral product.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what it was like to go from that day where you said I'll give him 15 minutes until where you are right now.
Yeah.
How did you find all those variables? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, look, I got lucky in that some of the people that when I joined, there were already some really great scientists and experts that had already come on board in terms of helping measure our carbon footprint. And, so I was able to like go look up some of these folks and make sure that there was like a legitimate, authenticity to this stuff. It wasn't just sort of a bunch of lip service and trying to create that next hot thing. Like there was a there. So I got lucky that, I did my research and I was like, okay, yeah, this is on the up and up. I don't know. Does that kind of help? Like, I don't know. How else can I
was really wondering. It just sounds like there's a lot of variables, and I know I would get overwhelmed.
There are. I mean, look, I've definitely had to tell myself that, like, it is okay if we are not perfect right now. Because, like, I come from the world of Whole Foods where, we definitely felt like we were up on a pedestal trying to, and so anytime we kind of got a shot or an attack, it felt very, like, hurtful. And I've had to, over time, like, not let that stuff get me wound up. I mean, look, we deal with that all the time right now and I get it. There are plenty of folks that think like anything to do with animal agriculture just needs to stop. Cold turkey. We need to stop it. It's too late. We should have stopped it decades ago, but like now we need to move hard away from that. Totally get that. Like I grew up in a vegetarian household. My mom is still very much a vegetarian. Like any of these sort of modern plant-based things would never appeal to her. She's not looking for like a vegetable burger that bleeds. She just like, she's like, if we're gonna eat a vegetarian burger, like let's just like soak some beans
let's do some lentils.
Chop up some mushrooms and like let's make something with vegetables in it. But anyway, so like I come from the place of like understanding that companies that are moving, saying no animal agriculture, like they exist for a reason and I get it. I also don't think that the whole world's going to go vegan or vegetarian to save the planet. Like I just don't think that. So
not fast enough.
Not fast enough, but we know that like I love cheese. I love my dairy products. I love my meat products from time to time. I totally can get on board with saying we consume too much of it, so we should eat less of that stuff. But the stuff that we do eat, can we just make it like less climate intense? And there are ways to do that, right? It just, it takes access to capital. It takes, if you're a farmer, you're busy out there dealing with, your operations 24/7. You're not getting on a computer trying to do research about how to like lower your carbon footprint, or like what are the tools or equipment or researchers, you know. So like there's a really, like, it feels really good that like at least a place that Neutral can occupy right now is trying to sort of enable more of that happening. Sorry, I think I'm rambling, but hopefully that was helpful.
Kavita, thank you first and foremost for being here today. This is exciting.
Sure.
And while I would definitely like to geek out on what it was like to be a Salt and Straw, bringing that to life.
Sure.
We're talking about Walter Robb and Whole Foods and what that's like. You brought up some topic, and thank you for asking the question. We've been doing carbon neutral certification since 2002.
Okay.
We're trying to
Wow.
solve that in 2 years, so applause on that. So 2 things to think about based on what I've heard you saying.
Yeah.
One is, how do we make this more accessible to the person that says it's just milk? And if I were to ask people to raise your hands, if you've ever thought about how many calories are in what you eat, and if you want to, you can raise your hand. If you don't care. But
Most
when
of us,
we think
yeah.
about that, calories were not on packaging at a point in time.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so
Totally,
once they
right.
were, they became. Now you're putting carbon as the next calorie.
Yes,
And you're
that's
trying
right.
to
Right?
think about how to make that happen.
That connection. Yeah.
As you then think another step forward, which is carbon neutral is today.
Mm-hmm.
But we hear about net zero.
Net zero
We hear
or-
about net positive. From just a purely branding and marketing perspective,
Yeah.
how are you thinking about adapting this core name of your business
Yeah.
as the shift in how these things are approaching to take place?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a name we have for the business now. Will it still be the right one in 5 years? Maybe not. I don't know. I do also like have had to get okay with like things that may be working now may not be the right thing 2 years from now, and that's okay, right? Like saying
part
what
of being
got
a
us
startup.
here, yeah. Right? Like I've just even in the 2.5 years that I've been at the company have been on like an entire roller coaster's worth of ups and downs. And if you had asked me a year ago, would I have thought this, or a year later, would I have thought that? I've had to get okay with saying this may apply now. It may not be the case 2 years from now, and that's okay. So Neutral, like our brand name, we might look back on this 10 years from now and be like, oh gosh, what were we thinking? You know, because you just never know where the industry, where terminology, where some of this kind of stuff may go. You know, and so it may make a ton of sense right now, but it may definitely need to change over time.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally.
I jotted down like 8 questions.
Okay, sure.
But I'm trying. And the first one is kind of like technical, so if that's not your area, then tell me to get lost. But
Sure.
I am curious if you're finding more GHG mitigation on the cattle feed side of things versus the manure management.
Yes. Sure.
And secondarily, like you have to be a farm of a certain size to have like an anaerobic digester. Or something
Right.
Like that. So
Totally.
Like, where are you finding success in the pilots?
Yeah. Both great questions. I would say yes, that like, look, I'm on this learning journey for sure, right? When I joined 2.5 years ago, I knew a tiny bit, like I recognized words, but I didn't know. So I made it a point to say I'm gonna learn as much as I can. I'll never know as much as maybe scientists or other people, but I can certainly, as someone that is tasked with like sort of the marketing side of this, depending on, and it doesn't matter who the audience, like I feel like it's my responsibility to learn this stuff. So 2.5 years later, like it's, I do feel really good that being able to say like, sure, actually when you look at a cow, you can kind of think of, they are these like incredibly optimized methane factories. Like they have just become so perfect at creating greenhouse gases. And now I can say for certainty, just like in working with our scientists and knowing that like a lot of it actually comes more from the burps than the farts and the manure. Truthfully,
Not
which is like a
something-
little tidbit
Wouldn't have guessed that.
right.
Learn
Most
something
people
new every
I
day.
don't think would have
I like
like
it.
thought about that, but actually like it's
My
more
kids are
about,
gonna get a kick out of that fact when I come home
right?
tonight.
See? Exactly, right? And we're learning this kind of stuff all the time. So yeah, I mean, I learned that very recently just in sort of, because we do a lot of different pilots and a lot of different types of carbon reduction. One is trying feeding seaweed supplement as a way to lower methane, but also the kinds of grasses that you grow out on pasture that can lower methane, as well as how you manage the manure. And so to the other question, there are definitely I have this my own internal kind of struggles with what is the right size farm operation, because in order to make sort of digesters work, you've got to hit a certain scale, but so there are trade-offs. When you are scaling up animal production, there may be some compromises you've got to make in terms of biodiversity or animal welfare, and so
But you're right there in the trenches with the farmers, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. But we definitely think about are there even even just solid liquid separators, which is kind of I'm going to talk about how you manage manure. Even having that kind of equipment only makes sense if you've got a certain number of animals on your farm. So again, one of the things we talk about is all right, well, if we want to continue to enable small family farms and the continual sort of making sure that they continue for the next generation and just don't get aggregated up, can we work with certain equipment manufacturers to try and find things that work for smaller family farms that normally would be otherwise incentivized to grow big, or never have the ability to, have equipment or something like that. So we're kind of thinking through a lot of different ways to approach it, but, yeah.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do one more up. Okay, we've got it. This will probably be the last one. But I saw you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Curious, how receptive have investors been for this, and whatever your response is, what insights can you share as to why?
Sure. It's been interesting having been with the company now for 2.5 years. I think there's a ton of interest just in so many different, who's trying to tackle the problem of climate and how are you trying to go about it, right? And so I think there's just a ton of interest generally, and it's certainly in the investor and, venture capital or private equity. I think there's a ton of interest. But I think also just with the way that things have changed in the market in the last year, I do think that I think it's going to affect fundraising for the next few years, and just I don't know how, but I know it's something that we think about. We just raised our Series A and closed that in August, and so we'll be working on raising a Series B sometime next year. And I know that how the market is going to affect how long of a runway we choose to keep, and how big of a Series B do we think we can raise, and what are investors going to be looking at before they're willing to write a check. I guarantee you all of that has changed definitely, even just in the last year. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I don't really know, other than just knowing that we're going to have to be a part of paying attention to all of that as we go back out for fundraising. So, yeah. Okay.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Kavita.
absolutely. Thank you.
Also want to say thank you to Marcelino, Nick, and the Photon crew for hosting us. And Topher, I adore you. Thank you for helping make this happen. It's always fun to have everybody. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Of course. Oh my gosh, thank you guys.
All right. If you
Yeah,
want to
this
know
is-
about solid liquid separation
Oh my gosh,
and how
I'm
we
so
deal,
sorry.
Kavita will be taking questions after.
I'm so sorry.
I know. I love it. I want to know.
Very focused and I followed.
It's great.
I